Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Talk of the Trinity podcast. England might be motoring their way through the tournament into the knockout stages, but the transfer news at Villa Park this season, in this off season, is very much in the qualifying stage. Or is it? That's what we're going to be talking to you about in this episode of the podcast. Some of it will be started in reality, may go a bit further. Time will tell. What is reality is I am Baz Barrett. I am joined by my co-host, formerly known as Mr. Trinity himself, but now as Grand Lord Emperor of Villa Park, Will Forrest himself. That's what happens when you win the Europa League. You know, egos get inflated and reputations get increased. So, as mentioned in the intro, because of the World Cup, the confirmed business in the transfer window is slow. I think it is probably fair to say. That not as slow as the plane taking off from somewhere in Miami to take Scotland home after their exit from the group stage. I'm glad, actually. People are giving Steve Clarke a lot of stick. I mean, they gave him a stick when he was in the job. They've given him stick for quitting the job. So just proving that you can never please anybody any of the time. But he must have been listening to a previous episode of this podcast because I remember making the request specifically for Scotland to go out in a group stage so nobody got any ideas about John McGinn. Luckily, Roy Keane was also listening because he spent the last 3 weeks slagging him off. So we can be sure, as we can be, that John McGinn will not be whisked away by Barcelona, Real Madrid into Milan after a World Cup winning run. But back to the more day-to-day realities of the Premier League and that transfer window. Another player who also isn't at the World Cup, but who had probably a slightly more disappointing season than John McGinn, is somebody who has been linked earlier on today, on our day of recording, with a potential move to Villa. I mean, the rumours had been kind of bubbling under probably for the last week, 2 weeks, but kind of in the category of the summer under Paul Lambert when we were linked with about 300 odd players all on the official Villa gossip website, and we signed none of them. But apparently it is getting a little more real, apparently. Will, what have you been hearing about potential first through the door this summer? Jared Bowen.
Jared Bowen, that right-sided midfielder for West Ham United. I've only heard it from Andy Goldstein on TalkSport saying that he is aware that Aston Villa will be signing Jared Bowen this summer. Darren Bent was on with him. Obviously, the former Villa player has a lot of nice things to say about Villa whenever I've heard him talking about them. And he asked, "Oh, I know where you've heard that from." And Goldstein said, "No, I can't tell you who I've heard it from." He went, "Well, it's obviously Danny Dyer." And Goldstein went, "No, it isn't Danny Dyer. I've heard it from someone else. It's nailed on. It's an exclusive. It's an Andy Goldstein exclusive." Um, who knows? Who knows whether he will be joining Villa? He seems to be the sort of profile that Unai Emery would want. You know, he's been one of West Ham's standout players in a season when they've massively underperformed, obviously, because they got relegated and they didn't have too many stars. But those players who have done well are being linked with moves away quite quickly. You can't see Crysencio Somerville playing in a championship next season or this season, whichever it is, especially after his goals at the World Cup.
Nope.
You can't see Fernandez playing in the Championship next season when Manchester United are knocking on the door for him. The same as Tati. I'm not even going to try and pronounce his second name, but he joined from Lazio, had a slow
Nope.
start, and then started banging in goals, doing quite well. 27-year-old, linked with Saudi Arabia, moves back to Italy, other Premier League clubs as well. Decent player, but he'll cost a bit of money. Jared Bowen is the one who probably, along with Somerville, makes the most sense to be returning to the Premier League quite quickly. He'll cost quite a bit, I'd imagine, even though West Ham have gone down. They've got the parachute payments, they've kept hold of Nuno. They'll be hoping for a quick return to the Premier League. But Baz, I would not pay 50 million for Jared Bowen. He's 29. He's
Yep.
played for England. He's arguably the best right-sided English midfielder this season. Um, I know Joe from the Albion Obsessed podcast liked him because he picked him for the England squad that we did. Yeah, I mean, 50 million. Would you pay that? Would you throw that at West Ham if you had
I mean,
to?
firstly, I'd like to know if his source was Danny Dyer or Danny Dyer. Which one is of massive significance for this story. But in terms of mentioning in respect of he's an Emre player, that's right. He fits in the profile of experienced,
Yeah.
proven in the Premier League, and apparently, and I can't verify if this is true or not, but from what I have read, which again you can't verify how good this is. Apparently, he's the only West Ham player who doesn't have a relegation reduction clause. So if that is true, then perhaps that would be a financial incentive for West Ham to perhaps be getting him gently ushered out of the door fairly early on. I mean, I don't think from a playing perspective they would want him gone, but I think if there's
Mhm.
some money to be had, Somerville shows the power of a good World Cup because I think he's added 10 million per goal, I think, to his value based on how well the Dutch are doing. As of time recording, they haven't played Morocco. That'll be a good game. There you go, giving you some World Cup insights as well. Two good teams
Oh,
make a good game, hopefully.
my alarm is set. My alarm is set for 2 o'clock in the morning for that one.
It's going to be a good one. But in terms of Bowen, Villa, 50 million, I see where you're coming from in the sense of you're not getting 50 million back when you sell him. It's very much present signing. It's not one for the future. It's not for the 10% sell-ons. It's not, going to be in the Rodgers category if that deal or a deal for Rodgers does go through, which is a topic for another day, not this one. I think in terms of well before, Emre has the keys to the castle in terms of, if he wants him, he's going to have him, no, regardless. But I think in terms of
Mm.
do from that pure financial value in terms of resale is, and kind of Villa being tight on financial fair play, you may have heard. Um, any regime you look at, we're probably struggling. From that sense, it does raise an eyebrow. But I think in terms of, I can see Emre's thinking, which would be qualified for the Champions League 2 years out of three. Although, yeah, the season just gone, we would have qualified by winning the Europa League, but then you can go in an alternate scenario of if we hadn't qualified through the league, would we have been in the same mental state for the final Europa? You can play counterintuitives all you like, but let's just assume we still would have won the Europa League. We're in Champions League anyway. Through the league, we were lucky. I think it's based on the points total. We
Yeah.
we had less points this season than we did last season when we didn't get in the Champions League, and I think it's more other teams perhaps handing it to us whilst we were staggering over the line in terms of league performance. Although two very good performances at the end of the season. But if you're looking at it from that perspective, by no means a guarantee of Champions League season in, season out. The squad was tested, I suppose, slightly further back in the midfield, you could say, during the second half of last season. But I think in terms of the way, and without wishing to bring back echoes of Peter Ridsdale and other such characters, the way Villa are going to get over the financial fair play is in effect to keep qualifying for the Champions League, to keep getting the cushion. So it's very much player like Bowen is kind of it's not quite all in because I think there'll be a little bit of cash left around the back of the sofa, but it's very much the type of player who, unless they get injured, which, well, as we just mentioned, a lot of injuries at Villa. From a Premier League perspective, at least, very low risk. You mentioned in terms of he had a good season in a team that didn't do very well, although, funnily enough, their points total would have kept them up most other seasons out of the last 10. So they could call themselves slightly lucky, or unlucky, although they were still pretty crap to watch by all accounts. So how lucky can you be? So he's the closest, it's not the closest, but he's in the category of risky signings in terms of what's he going to give you. So presuming he gets a 3 year contract, what's he going to give you over at least the first 2 years of that contract? You can probably expect fairly steady, fairly solid return in terms of goals, attitude, which is a big thing for Villa. In terms of, you mentioned John McGinn, in terms of he categorises what the attitude, the expectations are at Villa, and I think in terms of Bowen not being in the England squad for the World Cup, I think he'll have a point to prove
Mhm.
next season, especially if England do end up crashing out in the heights above sea level of the Azteca um, against Mexico in a week's or so time. So it's a low risk signing, but a very expensive low risk signing. It's the equivalent, and I can go wrong. It's the equivalent of speaking of the World Cup, I think it was Spain, Cape Verde, where somebody put like £1 million on Spain to beat Cape Verde, and he would have got like 10 grand back or something like something really stupidly low. And of course, that was a draw, and he lost his £1 million. So even the lowest risk investment can still um, backfire. But in terms of Premier League, I think Bowen relatively safe bet for the duration of his contract, and the if you can call it the gamble, the educated gamble that Emre and the board will be taking is if Bowen gives us 2 or 3 good seasons and we establish ourselves as a Champions League team in those 2, 3 seasons, then the 50 million is money well spent in that sense. Because in terms of the financial world table, in terms of where Villa are, I think we're in the top 20 now, and that's only after a year of Champions League football. The stadium capacity coming in hopefully next season, unless we've got the HS2 builders in. Then it might take a while longer. Hopefully not. Touch wood. So looking at kind of that time frame, increased. I mean, the ticket revenue isn't a huge amount of income nowadays for Premier League teams. The sponsorship will be that'll be the higher, and the hospitality, unfortunately, and that's again another whole different debate in terms of our fans, the lifeblood of the club, been priced out. We'll have plenty more shows in the summer to fill when nothing's happening in terms of transfers. So stick a pin in that one. But in terms of Bowen, yeah, I think if you're going to say we've only got 50 million to spend and we spend it all on Jared Bowen, I'd be yeah, I would be in your category of we could have probably spent that money a bit better. Um, I think for one player, I wouldn't blow it all on him. But I think in terms of if we're doing some wheelie dealing, for me, if we are spending 50 million on Bowen, again, I'd said I didn't want to talk about it. It suggests to me that we're planning for Rodgers, bit of cash coming in maybe to cover that. We're doing the dance with Martinez dance in terms of more a wage bill situation, if he's going to be going off or not. But to summarize my answer to your question in a sentence, I don't hate it for 50 million. But if that is the only money we got to play with, then I would have gone somebody, I'd go somebody younger. But in terms of for low risk investments, as low risk as you can be when you're spending 50 million on 2 legs and 2 arms, I don't hate it. But time will tell whether Andy Goldstein's secret sauce turns out to be actually correct or not. But yeah, I think if we get it done early, get him in pre-season, Hopefully, he'll help us in terms of what we need next season.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it it's one of them where apparently we've got 100 million to spend regardless of any sales, and that because of how well we did last season. That's the buffer that we've got. So, and there's talk as well that we're actually in a position where we can sell fringe players without having to sell the stars and players like Rodgers. And there is an episode on rebuilding after Rodgers on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, obviously. Where you sort of feel that obviously if Rodgers does go, then we'll spend that money. But also Suarez is seeing that Elliot Anderson's going for 130 million to Manchester City. In my opinion, Rodgers is worth a lot more than that. I won't go into it too much. We'll have an episode, as you said, another time. But the difference being there, Rodgers has won a European trophy. He's got Champions League football. He's played more international games, and as well, he actually won Player of the Tournament in
Yep.
Europe, and
So
he's still a young player.
let me throw the counter in there in terms of comparing Anderson to Rodgers in terms of value. Totally agree with what you're saying in respect to that. And the thing you're going to throw back at me is the age difference. But if Anderson's going for 130 million and Bowen is coming for 50 million, if that's true, is Anderson 2.5 times a better player than Bowen?
I mean, it depends what you need, doesn't it? And I
Yep.
think nowadays it's it's very much a seller's market rather than a buyer's market, especially when you know that Manchester City have just lost Bernardo Silva, so they need to replace him. And he was playing more as a central midfielder, more of a box to box central midfielder. And that's exactly what Elliot Anderson is. He's an old school. I'm not defensive, I'm not attacking, I'm a centre mid. Rodri, there's talk about him leaving as well. There's talk about Reinders leaving, and Kovacic has obviously been linked with the Villa over the last few days as well. So they're looking to rebuild. And there's also all the other Manchester City rumours that we won't get into because we don't want to have to call our lawyers. But decisions might be being made soon. Hence Pep leaving. I don't think. No, I don't. I don't think Anderson's worth two times however much than Jared Bowen. I mean, again, whilst it is a seller's market, it's not exactly a seller's market for West Ham because they are in the Championship. They are going to have players who are agitating for moves as well to get back into the Premier League. But they'll have some clout, I think, with some of those players. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if Jared Bowen stayed there, stayed on the wages he was on, which I imagine is 100,000 or a little bit over. I don't know. I could see him saying, okay, well, I'll give you a year. I'll give you till I'm 30. If we don't go up, then I want to leave. And I want you to accept a reasonable offer for me based on my age and what I've done for the club. Different for Anderson. Forest didn't need to sell. They've had a decent year in terms of revenue because of how far they got into the Europa League. They stayed up quite comfortably in the end. And I think they're probably going to have a good season next season as well. Pereira seems to have got them purring, um, quite well, and he's a very good manager. Jared Bowen, for me, him being 50 million is a bit like going into a shop and taking a Galaxy caramel up to the counter, and Galaxy caramels, beautiful piece of chocolate. You know it's going to go down well. You know you're going to enjoy it, and anybody that you share it with is going to enjoy it as well. How long will you enjoy it for? Who knows? You might be thinking about it for the rest of the day. You're not going to be thinking about it a week later. But it's like going in there and the shopkeeper saying, how much money have you got on you? Well, I've got 50 quid. All right, well, that's 25 quid then. £25. I'm not paying £25 for a Galaxy Caramel. I'll give you a couple of quid, maybe maximum. I wouldn't want to be paying really more than 20, 30 million for Jared Bowen. And that seems cheap considering the player that he is. But you also look at it and you think, how much do we really need Jared Bowen? Do we need a right-sided attacker? Leon Bailey, we're hoping to move him on. 70 grand a week. He's had one good season for us. If we get 10 million for him, I think we bite most teams' hands off. And you'd expect him to go to somewhere like the Dutch League or the Turkish League. That you're not going to have Premier League teams queuing up for him. Our first choice right winger, right midfielder, and rightly so, was our best player last season, John McGinn. And now he's getting a well-deserved rest. If Jared Bowen comes in, are you going to start him over McGinn? He's 2 years younger than him, but McGinn's our captain. Yes, Bowen was captain at West Ham. They offer different things. McGinn likes to come inside and create that column as we attack. Bowen's more of that, let's get in behind, be a bit more direct and score some goals. He probably score more goals than McGinn. No, McGinn had a fantastic goal scoring season, but I don't think he'd necessarily be our first choice unless Unai Emery says, do you know what, Morgan, we're going to put you back out on the left. John, we're going to put you in the centre behind Ollie Watkins. Then we're going to put Bowen on the right. Or McGinn on the left, Rodgers on in the centre. I think if you're doing that anyway, you're taking someone out of their best position. So the only way that I see it being a good transfer is if it's 20 to 30 million. And if he realises that there are going to be times where you're playing on the left and we'll train you up how to play better on the left, being a natural left footer as well, you'll add a bit of width for crossing, but we want you to stay high up the pitch and get in behind and almost become a front three with Rodgers and Watkins as well. Or if we're going to play you on the right, it's going to be very rotational. You're not going to play in as many games as you did last season for West Ham, as good as you are, because John McGinn is our man and our right winger. I mean, I'm talking to the biggest John McGinn fan out there. I think I'm speaking sense though when it comes to that. Or are you going to tell me actually, no, I've turned heel on John McGinn?
No, I agree with you in terms of 50 million is a lot to spend for a squad player. And you're going to, now he's had a rest as well. McGinn, give him first crack at that right midfield position. Interesting point as to whether there is a reshuffle in terms of that midfield, as you suggest. Maybe Bowen on the left, Bowen on the left, McGinn in the centre, or McGinn on the right, Bowen on the left. I mean, they're both going to be presumably reporting to, well, presuming it's true that the Bowen deal gets wrapped up fairly quickly, and that's probably a big if at this stage. But say that's true, and it's announced before players go back for pre-season training. McGinn's going to be there, presumably, and Bowen would be there, presumably. So if you are going to have a tactical tweak in terms of Bowen more on the left, then there is going to be time
Yeah,
in pre-season to get that established. I mean, we're playing a few friendly games. I mean, yeah, we're even playing. I think you could argue we're treating the Super Cup as a friendly game because we've got some more friendly games after the Super Cup, which strikes me as a little odd, but perhaps that might be a another conversation as we get closer to the Super Cup itself. But maybe it is in terms of you buying Bowen to come in the left, because in terms of you've got that, whether it is realistic or not, time will tell. Rodgers, he's playing in the centre. And if he does go, then you got Bundia, who has first crack at slotting into the centre. So switching Bowen to the left, keeping McGinn on the right, and then you got your two choice in centre mid. That's the least disruptive way, I'd say, of commentating Bowen, if you're going to do it that way. And I think in terms of if that is the plan, then I think that, refer back to what we said in terms of 50 million and in terms of the cash, that becomes more sensible suggestion. 50 million for a reserve if he's just playing on the right and he's rotating, then yeah, I'm kind of more alongside your line of thinking in terms of you're going to be playing McGinn first, and is Bowen the type of player who you're going to leave to be on the bench? He's going to be happy to be on the bench. I mean, he's been, captain of West Ham, playing every week. Yeah. If we had the luxury of being able to spend 50 million on squad players, then yeah, you would. But yeah, we might have to be a bit more pragmatic if that's the case. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see in terms of the Emre plan if that does go ahead in the next week or so. In terms of Bowen, time will tell. But speaking of transfers, which may or may not go ahead, we've got Bowen, which we've had a hot source of a guy on the radio saying that that's going to happen. So we're going to delve in deeper in terms of some other players who people on the radio haven't been saying a link with us, but are potentially, names to keep in mind during the silly season, you could call it, before the serious transfer business gets going, you would assume in a few weeks' time after the World Cup, or as teams start getting knocked out of the World Cup, then that might speed forward a little. So we're going to throw a few names out there, and we're going to, as is the style of these type of shows, just pontificate on whether these names are actually be a good fit for Villa, and we'll think about later whether he's actually realistic or not. So you've got a short list there, Will. So throw some names at us. Who you got on your list of potential people having the locker next to Jared Bowen at Bodymore Heath before the new season?
So I'm gonna throw some names at you. But what I think I'd like you to do actually is give me just a yes or a no. Do you think that they would be a good addition for the Villa and
Okay.
take them to the next level? Especially thinking about, and just going quickly back to Bowen, Emery wants players who are experienced, as you've mentioned, and rightly so. We need that now. We need a better squad of players. But with Bowen, why would a 29-year-old want to come in and play second fiddle to a 31-year-old? But, you know, let's have him as the first name. Jared Bowen, good signing for Villa for this. Is it this season or next season? For this season, Jared
Upcoming
Bowen.
season, maybe.
For the 26-27 season, Jared Bowen. What are we saying? Yes or
So,
no?
do I have to worry about where these players are going to play, value for money, or just whether they're any good and would fit in? How deep does the analysis have to be for a simple one-word answer?
Well, I've just realised this, and I'm so sorry, mate. I've realised that today is a bit of a special day for you because it's your birthday, isn't it? I'm right. It's today.
It is indeed.
It's your
Time of
birthday.
recording. Yep,
Happy birthday for one. Um, I won't tell everybody that you've just hit the big 2-0, you know.
I know. My, my
Um,
my beauty regime tells that without me having to say a word.
you know what? The people who are watching, they're going to be subscribing just to see more of you.
Yep, they're
You,
gonna, you know,
you, you
what
vibe. You
what a
strike.
treat. What a
You strike.
treat.
You strike that pose. I think what we'll go yes or no, but what I want you to think about really quickly is, do they fit the system?
Okay.
Either as a good sub to come off the bench, like a first, or someone who can come in and do a job um, for the Villa. So Jared Bowen, yes or no?
Yes.
James Trafford, yes or no?
No.
Real Sociedad goalkeeper Alex Ramiro, yes or no?
That's a tricky one because I don't know who else is coming next on a goalkeeping list. No.
Okay, no. Oscar Mingueza, Celta Vigo, fullback.
Yes.
Okay. Mateo Kovacic, Manchester City, centre mid.
Yeah, on a free. Yeah.
Well, they reckon 15 million for
Oh, oh God.
Kovacic. 32-year-old Kovacic.
I wouldn't pay 15 million for him.
I'm going to put a tick and a cross. Lucas Bergvall, rated at 40 million, wants to leave Tottenham Hotspur.
Not a 40 million. I think he'd be a good. I think he'd fit in the system. So in terms of that question, I think he'd be good. But 40 million for somebody who he's a younger Fabian Delph when Fabian Delph first joined us and just kicked everyone all the time. But he's got slightly better hair than Fabian Delph, I'd say. But yeah, so not for 40 million. No, no.
The right back who has recently been linked with us, Dave's done an episode on him over on YouTube. Flamengo's Emerson Royale, 15, no, 9 million he's been linked with.
I should have listened to his podcast so I knew what he was saying. I'd say yes for that money, yeah.
Okay. Right, we're going to get to the last couple now for you.
No, I need to sell a right back now. 50 million for cash.
Marcus Rashford.
If for system fit, yes. For 30 million, yes. 300 grand, no.
Yeah, fair enough. Senegal's Paris Saint-Germain right winger, Ibrahim Mbaye, 18-year-old. They reckon about 40 million for him.
I'm more minded to go 40 million for him than Bergval.
Yeah. Morgan Gibbs White.
Certainly in terms of quality, definitely. In terms of system fit, definitely. Worries me in terms of if they want 130 million for Anderson, how much they'd want for Gibbs White. Um, this isn't going to be the scenario, but if it was 50 million for Gibbs White or 50 million for Bowen, then it'd be 100% 50 million for Gibbs White. I anticipate Gibbs White is going to cost a bit more of a penny than that. But I think in terms of, for me, I think for the money as well, I think Gibbs White only comes into the picture if we've sold Rodgers.
Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, I think though not unfortunately, I think what we would have to do is we would have to buy Gibbs White before we sold Rodgers, so that the fee wasn't driven up by the sale of
Yep.
Rodgers. Just a couple more for you, three more in fact. Uh, a return of Jack Grealish.
And it's similar to Rashford in terms of presumably on like on a free transfer or a pack of biscuits, then
I'd imagine he'd be no more than 30 million.
I won't pay 30
Right.
for him.
Would it be a loan and then get him on it? Because his contract ends, doesn't it, at the end of next season? I think it is. With that in mind, if you're getting Grealish for around about 20 million or lower, 15 to 20 mil.
Maybe 15. I think in terms of again for a loan signing, and if we're not covering his wages, similar to Rashford, like in terms of 300 grand, I wouldn't have him for 300 grand a week because I think in terms of well in an Emre team, I don't think he'd start in an Emre team. So it'd be a lot of money for um somebody on the. I mean, we talk about Bowen for a lot of money for somebody on the bench, but in terms of I think for I'd say in terms of for Grealish, yeah, I think he's but best player I've seen in my lifetime at Villa. But I think in terms of just kind of where we are now, and as mentioned earlier, in terms of this being Emre's club and he gets to do what he wants and it's his way or the highway or his way or you're in the stands for the rest of the season as Harvey Elliott unfortunately found out to his detriment. I think it'd be a waste of money unfortunately with Grealish, just with Emre as coach. But yeah, I still think he has so it to offer from a pure footballing perspective. But yeah, using your criteria of the fit also having to work, I don't think he fits in this Villa. Certainly not the starting 11 currently.
I'd argue with Jack Grealish that he's potentially, well, he is. He's a better player than Emi Buendia. But I think Emi Buendia, if they both playing on the left with Rodgers in the centre, I think Grealish starts a lot of matches. because I think Buendia is more of a big game player. He tends to come alive when, Champions League, Nottingham Forest semi-final, the game against Freiburg as well. He's one of those who he's a player for the big occasion, or he's a super sub that comes on and impacts a game when defences are getting tired because he's industrious. I think him and Grealish are very similar, both left-sided players who cut inside. Would Grealish still be able to do a job on the left though? In the Emery system of cutting in and getting on the ball and playing it nicely to allow Luka Din to go on the outside or Ian Martson to go on the outside, potentially, but he'd probably be better suited to a number 10. And he'd only be a starting number 10 if Morgan Rogers leaves. And if Morgan Rogers leaves, are you going to replace a 23-year-old with a 32-year-old who's on higher wages than the player that you just sold? When there's players like Gibbs White, Joe and Manzambi, the Freiburg cam out there, and whoever plays behind Watkins now isn't a cam. They're a number 10. They're a second striker. They're someone to get up alongside Watkins. I'll go to the last two. I'm sure we'll touch upon some of these names again in a minute or two. Marco Asensio.
Okay, now it depends on the money because I think in terms of as a player, fantastic player, and I think in terms of he's clearly a fit in terms of the Emre system. Emre had spent 10 years chasing him around Europe to try and get him in the,
Mm-hmm.
the teams that he was managing at the time. I'd say in terms you mentioned in terms for price tag 15, 20 million for Grealish. I
Yeah,
said
you'd
that
have
was a bit
thought.
high. I think in terms of for Alonso, I probably would pay that. And then it comes to the wages, whether we can accommodate that. But subject to wages, yeah, I would have him. And in terms of he's the type of player who, well, as we'll remember from when he was here on loan the season before last, he's the type of player who looks like he's done absolutely nothing. And then you look at the scoreboard and he's just completely destroyed the opposition, scored 3 goals and assisted 2 more. And you're like, he's only been on 10 minutes. Well, what's going on? So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's getting the wages sorted. Yeah, I'd have him definitely.
I mean, the epiphany game for him was Tottenham in the FA Cup where he came on and started ripping them a new one, and we won. But also Club Bruges
Yep.
away where he came on, scored the penalty, slipped over, carried on, did very well. He didn't play too much all of the time for the Villa. He started to end up on the bench a bit, and I think what we did see with him playing was it disrupted Morgan Rogers. I maintain that Rogers had 6 months where he wasn't at his best because he was out on the right wing with
Yep.
Asensio in the middle and Rashford on the left. So Asensio coming would be either as a backup to Rogers or to replace him. And again, do you want to replace Rogers with a 31, 32-year-old? But he would be on less money than Jack Grealish. And he's probably still got the legs in him and a better end product to play 75% of the matches this season. And he didn't do it in the big games too. The last player I'm going to throw your way is one that we were linked with at the very start of the summer, a direct winger. There was talk of between 30 to 40 million, which I'd pay 30 for him. But 28-year-old, 17 goals last season, Newcastle United's Harvey Barnes.
Okay. For 30, I would, yeah. Because I think there's I was speaking to a Newcastle fan last week, and I made the joke, and very much jokes are in the eyes of the beholder, people, or I suppose the ears of the beholder, I guess. When we're talking about Gordon going to Barcelona, and I
Mhm.
said as a kind of in my usual waspish manager, I said, well, Harvey Barnes is better than him anyway, and expected a bit of a slap down. The Newcastle fan was, yeah, you're probably right there. So in terms of I mean, yeah, Gordon's a whole different story for Newcastle, and you know go listen to a Newcastle podcast if you want to know that. But it's consistency really with Harvey Barnes. I think in terms of some hot patches of form he's flying, and then he'll go missing for a few games at a time. But I think for 30 million, yeah, probably worth a punt.
I think you factor in for somebody like Barnes, where you said that he's had a good season, and the year before he was okay, and last season he did well, considering that Anthony Elanga was brought in very much to replace him. You would say Elanga and Marder and Wissa, it was meant to be as the two in the centre, whether that was a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-4-2, whatever Newcastle play. Um, he had a good year. Yes, he hasn't always been great. He was good at Leicester, but with a manager at the prowess and the understanding and also the obsessive nature of Unai Emery, you'd feel that he'd be able to get 2 or 3 good seasons out of Harvey Barnes. And Harvey Barnes was very much a left winger at Leicester City. I mean, if I'm wrong, please comment and let me know. He's played more on the right for Newcastle, but he's comfortable on the left. He's the type of winger that profile that apparently we're looking after as well, looking for even someone who stays high, gets in behind the back line and scores goals. And if we could bring somebody like Harvey Barnes in for 30 million, I wouldn't pay more than 35, I don't think, for him. But again, with Newcastle at the moment, they hold the cards a little bit more than other teams do, in the way that yes, they didn't get Champions League, but if they have got financial fair play issues, they've already sold Gordon for 80 million. They've got other players that they can sell as well. There's interest in Bruno Guimaraes, though they don't want to sell him because they will finish bottom and not win a match all season. They've got Sandro Tonali, 100 million, who could leave. You know, Harvey Barnes, they probably want to keep the other two over Barnes, but if they do that, then they're going to have to buy a winger, and everybody's going to know, well, they're desperate for a winger because all they've got is Murphy and Elanga. Let's double our prices of the wingers. And they have to then look at people like Bowen or Somerville. And I think that we'll be in very similar markets to a Newcastle, but we hold the upper hand because of that magical UCL, you know. And yes, Newcastle won the Carabao Cup a couple of years ago, a great achievement for them. But when you put the Carabao Cup next to the Europa League, then I think more people would want to be winning a European trophy. And yeah, I mean, I'm arguing with myself at the moment. With Newcastle, they've got a good chance of winning. They've got more chance of winning the Carabao Cup again than we have got of winning a European trophy next season, unless we win the Super Cup
Yep.
against Paris Saint-Germain.
We're unbeaten in the Super Cup
Yeah,
in terms of over 2 legs,
yeah.
100% record at winning the trophy.
I mean, we could win the Audi Cup as well when we go over to Asia. Um, I think it's going to be an interesting summer for us, but we've mentioned there a lot of the players that we're being linked with are very much wingers. It's surprising, I think, that a lot of those are right wingers, especially after how well John McGinn's done. You have to sort of think, is there going to be a shift in the way that we play again? Because if Jared Bowen is coming, and I appreciate we're circling back round to him quite a lot, Jared Bowen is going to be up alongside Ollie Watkins when we attack. If we keep Morgan Rogers, well, that's what Rogers does. It was McGinn and Buendia tucking in behind Rogers and Watkins. Is Rogers actually going to be in the 10 with Buendia, and Bowen becomes that inside forward second striker rather than Morgan Rogers? Or do we see McGinn in the middle, Rogers on the left, as we said, Bowen on the right, and we actually become more of a 4-2-2-3 when we attack that WM formation, as it's been coined previously? It's going to be an interesting. Emery seems to reinvent himself quite a bit, but out of those players that we listed there, were there any that you thought, you know what, if they came to Villa, then they could really push us on next season, help us get far in the Champions League and help us get into that top four? Because you can't guarantee top five's Champions League every season, but help us get into that top four Champions League spots.
I mean, just to finish off on Harvey Barnes, I think in terms of he will be the last one left when the lights go out. So I think kind of I think he will stay just because of the other exits that look likely to be happening at Newcastle. I mean, in terms of Tonali linked to Spurs, that's absolutely nuts. Like in terms of, I mean, Conor Gallagher's one thing, but in terms of, I know Italy don't qualify for the World Cup anymore, but come on, you don't need to lower yourself that much by going to Spurs. I mean, come on. But I think in terms of, any players mentioned in terms, it also leads into a question which I think will again come on to many more detail, more in depth in another podcast, and maybe when we got Dave on as well. What is the expectation for Villa next season? Can you say taking us to the next level? I mean, fourth in the Premier League, win the Europa League. Are we looking at title challenge? Is that going to be a gap that can be realistically be bridged in one season? Is it just fourth again for Champions League? Because as you say, you don't know if fifth is going to be enough. Is it, kind of to tick them off one by one, winning the FA Cup? I mean, I think in terms of it be a bold managerial strategy to say, right, we're focusing on the FA Cup and nothing else. So I'll see you back in January for when the third round draw comes in. Yeah, so I think that's the question is what looking for in terms of, are any of those signings you're going to look at it and go, wow, we're going to win the league with them? Probably not. But then in terms of, you look at Arsenal, who had a lot more money than us, taken six years under Arteta, is it? At least, and they've gradually built a squad. Gradually, in terms of, I suppose, the cliche of two players in every position who can kind of step in. I know you might argue about centre forward, but in terms of the progression of this Villa side, and in terms of the lifeblood really of Emre is European football. So in terms of the chat, especially now with the extended group stage, it's an even more drawn out process now than before. And then in terms of, if we don't make the top eight this time around, you then got another knockout game before the last 16. In terms of, if you buy three or four decent you say squad players, but players roughly on the same level as what you got to build it out for those hopefully Champions League days in March, April, if you're still in there for the business end. Are those type of signings going to help with that type of objective? And yeah, they are. If you look at it kind of from that perspective, do I think, yeah, we're going to be winning the Champions League? Depends on the draw. You never know. I mean, I still think in terms of, and again, this is let me just reach over here for my biased hat. Let's put that on the top of the head. I still think in terms of the team who've given PSG the most trouble in the last 2 years has been Villa. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see what happens if we get smacked 5-0 in the Super Cup, or kind of vice versa. But yeah, I think in terms of, that's going to be, again, perhaps a challenge in terms of, for expectations. We've won a European trophy. We've won a trophy. We got a 30-year hoodoo off the back. Is there going to be? I mean, remember, we talked about it last season after the start, the overreaction. Yeah, we said it at the time. I think we both called it out at the time, the complete overreaction 5 games in of, oh, Emre, get him out. He's past it. He's taken as far as we can. I think we said at the time how ridiculous that was. But in terms of now, if you've won, a trophy, is the expectation for fans now winning the league, winning the Champions League? And then if you're kind of not at that level, you go, oh, Emre's taken as far as you can. I mean, I think in terms of, for, for me, players you mentioned are going to improve the squad. uh, improve that overall quality of the squad. I think in terms of, so I've mentioned it on the show a few times over the years. I'd love to win the FA Cup. I think for me, in terms of that, would be the trophy. Although watching us lift the Europa League, I confess I was like, okay, this is pretty cool too. But I'd say in terms of it's you've got the shiny trophy now. The next leap up for Villa, I think, in terms of for me, and you'd love to be proved wrong. Are we winning the league next season? I don't think so. Are we winning the Champions League? I don't think so. But in terms of is qualifying, if we qualify for Champions League in fourth more comfortably than we have for the last two times. I mean, yeah, last season was because we were basically the least pissed people at a party, really. So it was that was kind of how we got it that time. The first time we qualified, we had more points, but again, in terms of we that was through other teams not getting the results they needed at the end of the season. We got it penultimate game. So progress for this team will be we've qualified for the Champions League with 3, 4 games to go. We're comfortable. We're there. That'll probably be enough to get you third potentially, depending on what everybody else is kind of doing. And if Emre is here, I mean, he's already one of his longest managerial reigns of his career already. The time he's been at Villa, but in terms of listening to like Guillaume Balaguer's saying Emre is here for the long term. This is kind of he's been given the keys to the castle. He knows he's not going to get this anywhere else in terms of a team who are capable of, kind of this amount of growth, kind of in terms of being able to operate at a high level. You got to think he's looking at 3, 4, 5 years down the line and where we're looking in 3, 4, 5 years. So I think in terms of the transfer business this summer is getting us into that. Yeah, we're not having to look over our shoulders kind of at the end of the season about Champions League. Yeah, we're comfortably there. We got it done. And linked to that, in terms of some of the players we were talking about and the Villa players who were there, you're mentioning in terms of, you mentioned Buendia, for example, saying he's a big game player. The It's inverted commas here. The problem, and it's not, other teams would love to have this problem, but the problem with this Villa team now we've got a hoodoo on the back, isn't can they perform in the big games? We've now proven this season just gone that we can. The problem that has been in Villa under Emre for the last few seasons, and I think that's partly because of the way these teams set up against us, partly I think because of maybe a drop in application because it's not the big teams. Our problem is we don't need players now who are going to perform in the big games solely. We need some flat track bullies. We need players who are going to go out and our record against the top 5, 6 over the last few seasons in the Premier League is excellent, one of the best in the league. Our record against the bottom 6 is probably one of the worst out of the teams who have been in the Premier League over those 2 seasons. In terms of last season losing Wolves didn't win any games, but they still beat us. Yeah, we've had when you can count the Burnley, we didn't beat penultimate game. Previously Ipswich we couldn't beat. They're the type of games which are going to be linked into the next level of being able to comfortably qualify for Champions League, saying, yeah, we are really capable of competing in the big games. Because we've proven under Emre time and time again, we can raise our game against City, United, Arsenal, maybe not Chelsea because they keep beating us. But, in terms of the big games, tick. It's those little teams, Luke Littler, uh, the so-called inverted commas small teams. Before I get everybody in the Premier League from other teams writing in lambasting us, the teams that are in the bottom 6 are the teams who you need to smack, and that's ultimately how one of the reasons Arsenal got over the line because their record was very good against the bottom half of the league. So that's where we need to go. And I think in terms of the transfers mentioning coming in, I think they're the type of players who are going to help us with that objective first. But I think in terms of it's a longer term aim, we've kind of completed the first section, which I think, looking back 10 years ago, saying, oh, the first part of the plan is going to be winning a trophy and qualifying for the Champions League, and then we're going to think about going up again. You'd be like, well, we're not, can't even get out of the Championship, let alone kind of worry about the Champions League. But yeah, I think that's the type of transfer business I think we're in terms of building that squad, getting that, Champions League consistency and really looking kind of to build something more. But that's my view. Is that too negative for you, or are you already planning the trophy parade in May 2027?
I completely understand where you're coming from, and I think what you say there makes a hell of a lot of sense. For me, I think next season, the upcoming season, this season, whatever season it
Yep.
is, season 5 of Unai Emery, if you like, I think now is the time to try and capitalise on all of the managerial merry-go-rounds that there have been in the Premier League, especially at the teams that are sat at the table that we want to be sat at. Arsenal, Arteta's going to want to push on and bring players in to win a second Premier League title. He did a very good job for Arsenal last year. As much as I don't like him and his behaviour, he did a very good job, and Arsenal deservedly won the league in the end. Um, but he's going to have to bring people in. He's going to have to spend a lot of money to bring people in to maintain that title defence. Man City, Maresca coming in, and all these potential players leaving, bedrocks of the team like Bernardo Silva, like John Stones. Enzo Maresca is going to have to do his best impression of Sir Alex Ferguson and reinvent that Manchester City team with younger players so that they can push on. I mean, he's very lucky, isn't he, that he's got the second best striker in the world up front. If I'd say
Oh,
Harry Kane is better than him.
you're
But
talking about Mamouche, I'm presuming.
but yeah, wow, I was talking about Mavuba, but yeah, they've got a lot of good players. Doku's coming into form. They've got Mamouche, who was fantastic when he first joined Man City and trailed off a bit last year. Foden's going to be chomping at the bit, but there's still a lot of uncertainty hanging around Man City with all of the other stuff that's going on behind the scenes. You've got Man United, who did very well, but they've now got a lot more football to play again, which they haven't had for a while, and it's adapting to that. And players like Cunha and Buemo aren't used to playing 3 times in a week, whereas we are with Emery. And then the last ones you've got, Newcastle had an awful season. If they don't pick up quickly, Eddie Howe will get the chop, I imagine, which will be a shame. He's done a good job there for them, all in all. I think Yabi Alonso is going to have it quite difficult at Chelsea again. I think they'll do well. I think, top 8, top 6 maybe. But and the one benefit for them is not having football 3 times a week. They've only got playing at the weekend. But how many players are going to want to stick around for that? How many people are going to want to stick around for the name Yabi Alonso when his best managerial thing is winning the league with Leverkusen? Great achievement.
Did
Beating
go
them.
unbeaten, to be fair.
Yeah, yeah, that as well. They were fantastic, beating Bayern Munich, but he didn't do very well at Real Madrid.
I mean, in terms of putting hiring him at Real Madrid was just stupidity. It's just like in terms of from a manager. You can understand why anybody wants to go to Madrid. I think he played for
Yeah,
Madrid as well.
it,
So and in terms of just to say I manage Madrid and to have that opportunity, very few managers would turn it down. I mean, I think even like if Emre went there, that'd be equally stupid from a fit perspective. But it's Madrid, and that's basically. I think if you asked him privately, why did you go to Madrid? It was like It's Madrid. I mean, it was always destined not to end very well, I don't think. And I think he's a good manager. I think Chelsea, in terms of they need somebody who has a structure and an identity and who's a proven winner. I think in terms of Rosinha was I don't know if disastrous is a bit harsh considering they wiped the floor with Villa, Villa
Very
Park.
clever
But
man, Racine was. Very clever man.
I mean, yeah, but I think that's kind of you can be a very good coach, but then in terms of I think a team like Chelsea, I mean, at Madrid it's like turbocharged, but in terms of it's the type of dressing room that will turn very, very quick on somebody who isn't deemed to have the necessary experience. And Chelsea are nowhere near as good as Real Madrid, and they ain't got as many winners as Real Madrid, evidently. But I think that was quite a slightly scaled down version of Rosinha. As soon as it started going wrong, it's like we got our scapegoat here. Let's get him sorted. But I think Alonso, he has enough respect in from what he had in his playing career. Very, very good managerial spell at Leverkusen. I mean, in terms of last season, Bayern did they win the league by about 180 points or kind of something like that. So I
Yeah.
think in terms he did a very good job at Leverkusen. I think in terms of yeah, it's going to be that. I know they're going to find another 100 million down the back of the sofa for more trainings, but yes, I worry more about Chelsea than I do Newcastle. I agree with you in terms of I think Newcastle could implode very, very quick. And I think in terms of for Man United, we were just mentioning in terms of is this Villa objective to win the league? Kind of is that where we're going? I think Carrick as hiring for Man United, it just puts him in the same cycle that they're in 5 years ago under Solskjaer, somebody who will galvanise the team, do a decent job in terms of getting the Champions League, but then the natives will get restless in terms of why aren't we challenging for the title? He's they'll lose away Arsenal or something like that, and then they'll just be doomed to repeat what they did before, which is good news for Villa. So I think in terms of in terms of we've spent the time. Oh, well, I've spent the time bashing them during this show because they annoy me. I worry about Spurs in terms of if you can if they get players like Tonali and they got Gallagher and kind of
Van
it,
Hecken, Senesi,
yeah,
Robertson, Van der Ven. Spurs are the team to watch out for next season because if they play with that aggressive style like they did at Villa Park against our B
yeah,
team, then they will go on and they will finish top five quite easily. Um, I think the one thing I would say about Chelsea, and you know what? Yes, Alonso did very well at Leverkusen, went unbeaten, won the league in a one horse town, really,
yeah,
where he wasn't the horse that should have won it. If they don't start right, if they don't, if they aren't in the semi-finals of the Carabao Cup come Christmas time, if they're mid-table in the league, I think he might have to worry because Chelsea can be trigger happy with
yeah.
anybody. They sold Cucurella, and apparently the first thing he heard about it was seeing it on Twitter with Fabrizio Romano. He had nothing. He didn't know anything about that. He's obviously brought in. He's bringing in an Italian right back. I can't remember the lad's name now, but 21-year-old international, very
Yep.
big future. But you can't play him and Reece James at right back at the same time.
Well, don't look like Reece James is going to be playing based on kind of his injury. But I'd say in terms of for Chelsea, he's trying to bring Xhaka in, isn't he? Sunderland have rejected an initial bid. Chelsea have some money for some more.
But they're
I will
bringing
say,
him in to replace Enzo Fernandez, who's going to Real Madrid for over 100 million. Yeah.
yeah, I will say in terms of if I think Alonso is a decent manager, but I'd say in terms of if that's the master plan, well, Fernandez wants to go, so I think in terms of if you can get 100 odd million for him, then goodbye, good luck type scenario. But if that is the Chelsea plan in terms of we're going to place Fernandez with Xhaka, and you can say in terms of Fernandez, he was up and down, like the team were up and down. That would lead me towards okay, maybe in terms of that episode of The Simpsons where Homer becomes the union boss and negotiates with Mr. Burns and then starts going round and on the floor and Mr. Burns goes, perhaps he's not quite the negotiating genius I thought he'd be. If that's a Chelsea plan of Xhaka in for Fernandez, then yeah, maybe I might be slightly reconsidering that view. But I think they'll have a decent season.
I mean, the other one there as well is Liverpool, and
Yep.
Liverpool have brought in a fantastic manager who revels in organised chaos with the way that Bournemouth were attacking. How he managed to get them and guide them into Europe after they sold all the players that they did from their defence was phenomenal. Uh,
Unbeaten after they sold Semenyo.
yeah, yeah. But Liverpool have got an aging squad. Salah's just left. I know there's talk about Salah might stay now that Slot's gone. Van Dijk's getting on. Konate's left as well. Allison has talked. There's rumours that he wants to leave. Um, I think getting back to that question of is this the time that Villa need to push on and win the league? No, I think it's unrealistic to say we should now be challenging for the title. But I also think that this is probably a season where we should be going, do you know what? Let's go and spend some money if we can, as much as we can, without falling foul of regulations. And let's go and see how high we can finish. For me, if I was Emery, I would be saying the bare minimum is top 4 or 5, dependent on Champions League, what that gets you. 70 points. I want at least 70 points because that for Villa would be an amazing achievement. And then if we can add a cup as well, and he's not going to take the Carabao Cup seriously. Let's be honest. You know, it would be the FA Cup. Then that's a bonus on top. I think that with, as we said before, with the financial rumours of we've got 100 million and then we can spend a lot of what we make. You sell Martinez for 15 million. You bring in Alex Romero for 8 million. 31-year-old, very good with the ball at his feet. Isn't the same character as Emi Martinez, but he's trusted. He knows Alabi from Real Sociedad. You have to bring in, you can't just look at let's bring in players to make the squad better anymore. I think you do that with the money that you generate from sales. Bailey going for 10 million, you bring in a better squad player there. Harry Wilson would have been a better squad player, but he's gone to Leeds, and it would have made us 10 million profit if you like. Mings leaves, you've got to bring in a better squad player there. If Mingueza comes in on a free transfer, he's a better squad player than Garcia, and you get a bit of money for him. Luca Dean or Martson, one of those two are likely leaving. You have to bring in a good left back. Ideally, you want to bring in a left back who is going to get in ahead of them. We don't have the money for him, but a Lewis Hall type of player. I would be taking that 100 million first of all and saying, what do we really need? We've got central midfielders. We've got Kamara when he's fit and Anana, and we've got Tielemans and we've got McGinn as well. We do have an aging squad also, so we have to spend that 100 million wisely to bring in 2 players that are young or younger that can help us get to the next level. And if I was spending my 100 million as Unai Emery, I'd be going after and keeping my fingers very much crossed that he would take a wage cut. Otherwise, I'm going to have to sell somebody, Marcus Rashford, for 30 million, because he would be the perfect left-sided player. I think if he rejoined us, I could see him being one of the top scorers in the league, being England's out and out left winger, and going on and challenging or being nominated for Premier League Player of the Season. The other player that I'd be looking to bring in would be a younger player who maybe isn't in the starting lineup all of the time, but I'd be looking at a Manzebe at Freiburg, 30, 40 million, 20-year-old, scored a couple of goals at the World Cup. He was the only player for Freiburg who looked decent against us in that final. He liked to get on the ball and run with it. He looks like a natural replacement for Rodgers as well. But those are the sort of sign. And I think even if you bought those two, you've probably still got 30 or 40 million left over to play with. And do you go and offer 40 million for Lewis Hall and have that rejected because it probably would be? Do you go and have a look at who can I bring in as the backup defender now for Pau Torres? Do I go and get a Chalobah from Chelsea if he's going to Como? Do I go and look at someone else to bring in there? Do I bolster the midfield? I mean, you, I don't think you'd agree with this one, and football's about opinions. That's absolutely fine. If he hadn't have got injured for Uruguay, I'd have looked at bringing someone like an Ugarte in on loan and seeing how he did at the Villa, because he did well at Paris Saint-Germain, he did well at Lisbon, and we need somebody in the ilk of Kamara to play when Kamara's injured inevitably. And Nana isn't that player. And Nana plays alongside him, and then you have that dilemma of, well, we're going to spend all this money anyway. Kamara, Anana, Tielemans, Rodgers, where does Rashford fit in? Where do these other players fit in? But what a great headache for Unai to have. I think if we can spend that 100 million, so to get to the thing, top four with 70 points and potentially a cup. But if we're smart and we act quickly, we should be challenging. And if we're there or thereabouts come the end of February, end of
Yep.
March, I think that that's a fantastic season for us. Team fans will inevitably say, "Oh, we tailed off at the end. We couldn't maintain it." But if we're still challenging then going into the business end of the season, that just goes to show that Emery's onto something and he's replacing the squad as he should be. And it would make him want to stick around rather than start looking elsewhere when big clubs inevitably get rid of their managers and start mentioning his name again. You know, I genuinely do feel that if we are going to challenge for the title, if we are going to go deep into the Champions League again, if we are going to become a club that wins trophies, and nothing's guaranteed just because we've won one, our biggest signing or our biggest thing we can do is keep hold of Unai Emery and show him that we've got that ambition, both with the money that we give him and the the final results that we're getting at the end of the season.
Yeah, I think in terms of if we're top three by the end of January, then that's another psychological hurdle we've got through because then the January transfer business will have been at least partly dictated by being in that position. And also the last couple of years we kind of got to Christmas and then it's fallen apart for different
Yeah,
reasons. So yeah, I think if we get to January, end of January and we're still challenging, then that's progress. Obviously, I like your suggestion of still being there at the end of February, the end of March. Challenging, but yeah, I mean, in terms of I agree with you entirely. The Emre factor in terms of you know XG, anticipated points per game, kind of all that. But there's the Emre factor. There's the EPG, the Emre points per game, and this is him. You could argue bottom half team. I mean, we're a bottom half team in terms of for the second half of last season. But yeah, Emre is what, it's not shocking to say he is I say secret sauce. He's not so secret sauce. He's the most open source in terms of elevating this team. And yeah, I think in terms of building steps forward to encourage him to carry on sticking around, believing in the project. Yeah, that is going to be, I agree with you, kind of the main aim of next season. And if we win the FA Cup, that'd be cool.
there we go. That is Baz's birthday wish. Villa to go and win the FA Cup. So Unai,
Yep.
don't worry about spending your money on Jared Bowen or that other stuff unless it's going to give us the FA Cup, because that's what the birthday boy wants. But
Yep.
let's see what happens as the season unfolds. Let's stick together and see who we bring in, who the latest rumours are, whether the name Benny McCarthy, Janino, uh,
Roberto Carlos.
Roberto Carlos, I was going to say Miloš Rabio or whatever his name was. that we always got linked with that went to Norwich City in the end. I mentioned him jokingly on Twitter, and I had a Galatasaray Fenerbahce, a fan of a Turkish team, say, is Rashika definitely joining the Villa this summer? I mean, I don't think so, mate. We've been
No.
after him for about 50 years, you know. Um, but we've got plenty to talk through. We've got predictions to come as we get closer to the season. You know, we always love those episodes. We'll get Dave back. We'll have a look at what we think the Villa need to bring in. We'll have a look at a few signings that we feel would be perfect for us. Hopefully, we don't have to do an episode on what do we do now that Morgan Rogers has left. Instead, we have an episode of bloody hell, how well can we do now that Kavika Kvaratskhelia has decided to join Aston Villa, or Harry Kane has decided to, you know, wishful thinking. Baz, make sure that you do the big wishes when you blow out those candles on your cake later. But until next time, whether you're listening from the warehouse, from the rejuvenated Trinity Road with just the two tiers for next season, the Witten Arms, or you're lying on your sofa hearing two brummies talk about Villa and then realise that they're not talking about sunny, sunny Spain. Cheers, Tar. Thank you very much for listening. Up the Aston Villa birthdays.